and welcome to this April-May 2023 edition of Protein Production Technology International. And continuing this feature on alternative seafoods, we're pleased now to be speaking with Chris Bryson, who is the founder and CEO of New School Foods. They're a Toronto-based startup that we featured in our news earlier in the year after the company secured a $12 million seed round, taking the company's total funding to about $13 million. New School Foods' first product is a plant-based filet, which looks, cooks, tastes, and flakes just like wild salmon. And as I'm sure Chris will tell us, they're achieving this with, among other things, some novel muscle fiber and scaffolding technology. So, Chris, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad
Yeah.
glad that you brought up the very important discussion, which is it pronounced fillet or fillet? Because I'm not a fillet.
Well, in the UK here we say we say fillet, and then sometimes we say filet mignon. It depends. It depends what restaurant we're in. It's a fillet of fish in McDonald's. That's all I know anyway. But not that I eat them. But look, first off, how did you get into the food tech space? I think I read somewhere that at one time you were involved in e-commerce. Is that right? It's a bit of a jump from e-commerce into food tech.
It's a bit of a different world, and it was completely unexpected. So my prior life, if you will, was in the e-commerce space. So I was the founder and CEO of a white label e-commerce platform that would work with major grocers to help them sell their groceries online. And we started it back in 2011 when people said, "Oh, online grocery, that will never work." But it was a business that was rooted in behavior change, and it was a really, really fun ride. So at the time of the acquisition, which was in 2018, it was the first time I had time, and I felt in the rabbit hole of learning about our food system, and that in turn got me very excited and motivated about getting into this space. And the idea of something completely different was quite attractive to me.
Mm-hmm. So what was your inspiration for starting New School Foods and seafood in particular? A lot of companies are out there making alternatives to conventional meat products, and you've picked seafood.
So first, at a high level, I got involved in alternative protein because I learned about the realities of factory farming, and that really struck a chord with me. It was sort of it was a multi-month experience that really changed my life, and I became very passionate about getting involved in the space at first. So I didn't think at first I had any business being involved in a startup, because I'm not a food scientist, I'm not an engineer, I don't even really like to cook. So
Right.
why should I be running a food company? So I first got involved actually as an angel investor. I thought that's how I best could contribute. And what I noticed very quickly, and this is back in like circa 2018, 2019, 2020, this is in the heyday of Beyond Meat and Impossible. I think they IPO'd in 2018. And everyone was interested in getting to the space. So there were tons and tons and tons of startups, and there were also a lot of investors that got involved in the space that really came from the tech industry. They didn't really understand food. And what I noticed time and time again is that most of the startups weren't really being encouraged or motivated to invest in research and development. So you ended up with a lot of companies that were creating a lot of Me-Too products using the same ingredients, same process, same technology, which inevitably leads to a lot of sort of missed expectations. So I got involved with New School primarily as a reaction to seeing that there wasn't sufficient R&D. So New School actually first started out as more of like a holdco that was sponsoring various different research and development projects in the hopes that one of those would uncover something exciting, and then we could turn that into a more standard company.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm right, you're currently focusing on wild salmon. I mean, why is that? Are there any specific conservation concerns with this species? I mean, what's the current state of play?
So when we first were in that research and development phase, we did have the overall target of being able to create a whole cut fish analog, and we did decide to double down very quickly in the project on salmon as a species. So the reason for that was primarily volume. So if you look at North America, salmon is the most highly consumed species of fish. In fact, second most highly consumed type of seafood, second only to shrimp in terms of metric tons. And the reason why we decided to focus on salmon instead of shrimp is because we really wanted to focus on a center of plate, like a product that you have for dinner, that maybe you go out to a restaurant and you seek out. We knew that because we were going to take a little bit of a longer road to come to market, and invest in research and development, that we really wanted to go after a product that was going to be incredibly enticing, but incredibly difficult, but still very important to pull off, like in terms of changing our food system. And so obviously salmon is highly consumed, highly desirable, but a very difficult product to tackle. So that's why we went after it.
Yeah. I mean, you're still a fairly young company, but you've achieved a fair amount already. I mean, of those milestones, which one would you say so far has been the most significant? I mean, that could be a tech breakthrough, it could be a key hire, it could be an investment round, for instance.
I would have to say it's probably the technology that we've developed, and
Mhm.
it wasn't an overnight thing. It's been a matter of incremental discoveries building on them on each other. So it's been a 3-year process to really take the tech to where it is today. We still have more work to do, but it's produced some exciting products that you've seen, I think, in the photos and the videos. But yeah, I think the technology that we've created is exciting because it accomplishes something that most of the other technologies, or none of the other technologies, I would say, do accomplish, in the sense that it creates a product that is incredibly fibrous. It's whole cut, and fibers is really, that's the essence of meat, whether it's seafood or land-based meat. So it accomplishes a lot of things. It's also a very scalable technology, and
Mhm.
that unto itself, I think, is really the highlight, is how we've created this technology that can create a new class of products.
Yeah. When you've got those important areas, I guess you've got taste, texture, aesthetic as well, and then, mouth feel, and I guess functionality as well, cooking. Achieving all of those at the same time is no mean feat.
It is not. We often internally refer to it as kind of a Rubik's Cube.
Uh-huh.
So it's interesting how you can try to solve one problem, and as soon as you solve that, suddenly 3 other problems are potentially adversely affected. So the reason why it's
Yeah.
taken 3 years is to really, you can solve the Rubik's Cube, but it takes time. It's a bit of an art
Yeah,
form,
sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, my stepson seems to be able to do it. Apparently, there's a formula. You can look at it on YouTube. Now, the process that you use, I understand, is quite unique. Most other plant-based meat products are extruded. So they're essentially start out cooked. Yours, I believe, starts out looking raw, and I've seen pictures of it, and it's crazy. So it takes on an appearance of a cooked fish as you cook it. How do you achieve that, if you're allowed to let us into any little trade secrets?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And thank you for asking. So I think what's fundamentally different, the reason why we wanted to go a different path than extrusion, as you astutely pointed out, is that extrusion uses heat to create texture. So basically you heat your proteins to a really high temperature, and then you stretch them out through this long, typically cylindrical long vessel. And so that creates texture. And obviously we need texture, because if you're working with soy, otherwise you just get something that's untextured, like tofu. I mean, it has texture, but not obviously a very different texture than meat. So the goal is to really create that fibrousness. The problem with using heat is, as you also pointed out, is that it cooks your proteins. And so then what happens is you have to do all this interesting, you have to add other ingredients that will transform the color upon cooking, so it simulates the transition from raw to cooked, but
Mhm.
effectively your proteins are pre-cooked. And that can also lead to textures that are less desirable, that are more rubbery, because they're heated to really, really, really high temperatures with some of these plant-based proteins. Um, so we wanted to approach it differently, because working backwards from hopefully a very solid outcome 5 years down the future, where people are buying our product in the grocery store at the shelf side by side with fish, we knew right away that we needed our product to look like the product it's going to emulate. And if we use the technology like extrusion, we're not going to produce something that looks like raw fish. Raw fish has a characteristic look to it. It's shiny, it's semi-translucent. You know, you've seen how it transforms from raw to cook. And so we knew that extrusion didn't feel like it was the right tool, certainly for whole cut fish alternatives. And we wanted to start off with something that looked, like I said, more raw initially. So we pioneered this new technology that would allow us to create structure or those muscle fibers, but using actually the opposite of heat. We use cold, we use freezing in order to imbue texture into our product. So that's just a little bit of a high level.
Yeah. I am a bit of a cook. I am forced with doing most of the cooking in the house. So, I cook salmon in different ways. Sometimes I have it raw if it's marinated or something.
Mhm.
Are you able to achieve that with this product?
So Our goal is really to optimize around a cooked experience itself.
Hmm.
I'd be lying if I said we don't, check in to see how it is raw. But once again, going back to that Rubik's Cube analogy, we're really trying to optimize for the scenario that we think most customers are looking for. So there are lots of other amazing plant-based seafood startups that are focused on raw food applications like poke bowls and sushi alternatives. And we really want to go after the space that less people were focused on, which is the cooked application. I think over time, we will try to optimize the product to work in both scenarios, but we're really trying to right now focus on that center of plate, your dinner, your entree.
Yeah. I mean, the look of the product and the texture, and the functionality, I guess, when you're cooking, scaffolding comes into that in a big way. What sort of ingredients are you using for the scaffolding? And then what ingredients are you using to build up that sort of muscle and fiber tissue around it?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tackle them sort of in that order. So when we create our scaffold, we're typically using a mix of different ingredients, which are typically called hydrocolloids. And sometimes we'll mix those hydrocolloids with a couple of other ingredients, but they're really the hero ingredients that help to first create a gel. And then we use some freezing technology to transform that gel from what would be something analogous to like Jello, if you're
Mhm.
probably familiar with Jello, transform it from a piece of Jello into a scaffold that has channels, that has directionality, and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, there's lots of different hydrocolloids out there, and the nice thing about what we've been able to figure out in the lab is that for some applications, some hydrocolloids are good. For other applications, others might be more suitable, and not every single one of them works. So there's a pretty wide range that we work with today, and there's actively this month sort of a side-by-side race between two different systems to see which one's going to work. But yeah, effectively the scaffolds are primarily hydrocolloid based.
Uh-huh. And
And
then
then
the ingredients yourself.
yeah, and then the ingredients. What's really exciting to me about the scaffolds that we create is they're effectively like an empty vessel, or we use them as vessels. And that gives us the freedom to work with a variety of different ingredients. And really, this becomes a platform. So that means that whatever formulation we come up with for salmon, we can use different ingredients, different proteins for other products. And so some of the things that we pay attention to, for example, is, okay, well, at what temperature do we want it to cook? Do we want it to transition? And some animal meats sort of have different transition points. So we can tune the ingredients to make sure that we're emulating as closely as possible the ingredients to have the right functional
Hmm.
benefits or the functional sort of properties that would best emulate that animal product. So we use a variety of proteins that have different characteristics. We use functional proteins, and we typically blend that with sort of other bulk proteins, if you will, to create our own blend. And then we mix those proteins also with fats, and those fats are typically liquid fats, because we know that consumers are going to have this expectation that if it's plant-based fish, they're still going to get their omega-3s. And we've tested that over and over with different consumer panels, and unequivocally, that's the first thing that people expect is their omega-3 content. So we're able to get those into the scaffolds as well. And then aside from the proteins and the fats, the liquid fats, I should say, which are healthy fats, they're unsaturated fats, they're good for you. We then will also include flavors and colors. So it's a fairly forward formulation, if you will.
Yeah. Well, you answered my next question there, which was about how you engineer the sort of nutritional benefits of conventional fish into your products. So you're ahead of me there.
Well,
There's some.
I would say, well,
Sorry,
it's
go on.
funny that you ask about nutritional benefits, and when we ask consumers what they're looking for in a plant-based analog, there's really two things that pop out. One is omega-3s. The other one is protein. And that seems like an obvious and a given, but the reality is that a lot of plant-based seafood analogs that are out there and that have been around for quite some time typically don't have any protein. And so it's very important that if you're going to substitute a piece of fish, that it really is a protein. People, grocery stores often, I know this from like my former life and working with grocery chains, they always refer to the meat as like a center of plate protein. That's really what consumers are primarily looking for in their meat. And so if you don't have high levels of protein, you're not really a proper analog. So
Mhm.
getting a high degree of protein is something that our scaffolds allow for, and obviously that's a really really important thing for consumers. So those are the two primary things, and then there's some other nutritional benefits that consumers often look for, and it varies a lot after those first two come up.
Yeah. I mean, this has been 3 years in the making, did you say, where you're up to today? I mean, what have been the biggest challenges for you in getting to where you are today with this product, and how did you sort of, get that pattern right on that Rubik's Cube?
It's, I mean, the funny thing, the major thing that I've felt is really different in terms of running a food company instead of running a software company is in software, if you imagine something, then you can put it on paper, you can design it. And if you can design it, you can code it, you can build it, you can launch it and put it in front of your customer. Food doesn't work that way. If you imagine it, that's great, but you have the laws of chemistry and physics to fight against.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, because I don't want to seem like I'm dodging it. I think the biggest challenge is really just fighting through the R&D, because you can be onto something and it feels like it checks 9 out of 10 boxes and it's this incredible technology, but then you find out that it has this fundamental flaw, like it relies on an ingredient that is either not approved or not cost effective, or maybe for example, you create the perfect plant-based salmon, but I know we had some early prototypes that didn't have heat stability, for example. So when you would cook it, like some of the scaffolds would melt away. So you can have this perfect performance that does everything, but until you check all the boxes, you're not really there. So I think the hardest part of R&D is pushing through it and persevering and making sure you leave no stone unturned.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, hopefully you'll be rewarded, but there's no guarantee either.
Yeah. It's a small community, alternative seafood. I even heard the other day that there's a WhatsApp group that has seven of the players in there. Now, you probably keep an eye on developments from your competitors, or competitors in inverted commas. Is there anything from another company out there that's really impressed you? And if so, why is that? Something that you've seen or tasted and just thought, wow.
I mean, there's so much out there I really look at it as a source of inspiration. I don't look at these companies as competitors. I see them as collaborators. I mean, effectively, we are collectively trying to create a new category. And so to some extent, it's really, especially in the early days, it's very valuable to have other people pursuing the same mission, because it increases the noise floor. It helps basically split the cost of marketing, and increase consumer awareness, consumer demand. So um, I see all of the other players. I avoid using the word competitor. I see them as allies.
Yeah.
I've seen, for example, the ones that are doing plant-based whole cut fillets of salmon. There are two companies in particular, so Revo Foods as well as Plantish. Like, their products look incredible, and I
Mhm.
know that inspired our team when we looked at those videos. And so, what I like about having other players in this space is, I think that at the end of the day, this is going to benefit the consumer and is going to benefit the industry, because if we can always push each other to produce superior products, how is that a bad thing? So I think there's so many sources of inspiration, so many companies working on exciting stuff. I think the next 5 years is going to be pretty interesting for alternative protein.
It's nice that it's a collaborative industry as well. Yeah, generally
Absolutely.
on the whole, I would say
And very, very,
99.99.
very, very, very supportive people, like very open book, willing to share and willing to talk. And so it's oddly friendly. It's kind of weird. It wasn't like this. It wasn't like this in software. This industry is really unique that way.
No, I bet, I bet. Now, your business model at the moment, as I understand it, is to sort of work with restaurants first. I mean, what's the thinking behind that? I know it's a popular strategy for some players in this
It's
sector.
Yeah, I think it's an important strategy in the sense that chefs act as a form of validation for consumers. So it's almost like, if I can impress the chef, then the consumer feels more comfortable and more confident about the quality of that product. It acts as a certain badge and endorsement, if you will.
Mhm.
And plant-based seafood effectively is mostly, I don't want to say a non-existent industry, but it's at its very, very early stages. and you don't see plant-based seafood alternatives being widely available in any restaurant today. So there's a wide open space for someone to crack through. And I think that get as it turns out, one of the interesting facts we learned is that 70% of seafood is consumed through restaurants. So if you want to go where the consumer is, it's in restaurants more so than in grocery. So it's for a combination of those two reasons.
Yeah. You mentioned the future before, and that sort of next 5 years is going to be very exciting. I mean, how do you see this whole space evolving over those few years, whether it's plant-based or cell-based or fermentation-derived seafood products?
Well, I don't think this will happen immediately, but I think when you fast forward 5 years out, you'll see a lot of hybrid products, and that delineation between plant-based versus fermentation-based versus cell-based, that's probably going to go away over time because I sort of see all those technologies as tools in the toolkit. And today, some of those tools might be too expensive, but over time, they're going to come down in cost. And it might be that that tool is better than another. You know, it might be that a recombinant protein is more appropriate than a plant protein that that company is using. So as long as your system doesn't prohibit you from using cell-based or recombinant proteins or ingredients, because there's more than proteins, there's cell-based fats, then I think most companies are going to embrace the creation of hybrid products. And I think that's also it's going to come from the plant-based companies, you know, sourcing those ingredients. I think it's also going to come from cell-based companies realizing that it's more economically viable for them to create hybrid products themselves. So I think those lines will begin to blur. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but certainly 5 years out, that's going to happen. That's probably going to be one of the most exciting things. It's just seeing more tools in the toolkit come to bear. So I think there's been a huge amount of push around getting either cleaner ingredients. There's been a lot of pushback from plant-based protein products having too much sodium. A lot of that actually comes from upstream. So there's been a big push to get ingredients and proteins that are cleaner, have less off flavors, have less colors. And the suppliers and manufacturers know that. So over time, the ingredients are going to get better. And I think the technologies for processing are also going to get better and better. I mean, most of the technologies that are used today for plant-based proteins were sort of adopted from other industries. So they aren't necessarily tailor-made. And that's where, you know, there's a really exciting company called Rebellious Foods is developing tailor-made production technology for alternative protein products, which will make them more cost-effective. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I think you're going to see huge improvements in price. I think you're going to see also improvements in quality because we're going to have new tools and technologies to work with.
I guess with plant-based, the regulations don't impact you as much as, say, if you were trying to produce a cultivated seafood product.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. I mean, of some of those sort of wider challenges, regulations for some of the players in this sector is a difficult one. But as I understand it, it doesn't have to go through the USDA process. It's just the FDA process. I think that's right in saying that. One of the other big challenges is obviously the consumer. So do you see that as the biggest barrier to more alternative seafood consumption?
I think for this entire industry, the consumer is really the gatekeeper, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to pull off is not just creating new products, we're actually trying to create habit change. And I think there's a big distinction. It's not like we're trying to sell, for example, a car that's a one-time purchase. And we're trying to create products that literally change people's behaviors, or that you want to basically get someone to purchase that product multiple times. We don't want people to buy the product once, get excited about it, and forget about it. So behavior change, I think, is really, really difficult to accomplish. We saw this also in the software side, actually for online grocery. We noticed that we typically had to get someone to a fourth or fifth order for it to become habit, for that to become part of their new routine. And I think it's going to be no different with alternative proteins. And we can't just expect that if you produce a great product once that people automatically remember and repurchase it. So yeah, it's not just about creating a great product. Obviously, the price has to be attractive to purchase it and keep repurchasing it. We need to stay front and center within the consumer's mind to get them to sort of introduce these products into their grocery basket.
Yeah. I went to an exhibition in London last December, I think it was early December, and I could not tell. I wouldn't have being able to tell you the difference between some of the things that I tasted. They just blew me away. So,
Mm.
um, how do you measure success, Chris? You know, at what stage do you sit back and think, yeah, okay, I did it there? And in addition to that, what do you think is going to be the tipping point for these alternative seafoods to really, really take off?
hmm I mean, I very much subscribe to the Good Foods Institute's philosophy that you really have to match on taste, texture, and then win at price. And I think once we do that, and we do that across multiple product formats, there's more to meat than burgers and chicken nuggets. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I just mean from a consumer portfolio perspective, we need to create a full assortment of products. So I think when individual products start winning on taste, texture, and price, then you're going to see this go from being a niche product or a premium product to really being a mass product. I think that price is probably the biggest tipping point, and that's why I'm super excited to see what comes from companies like Beyond and Impossible over the next 2 years.
Mhm. Do you expect any of those companies to move into the fish sector?
I uh, I can't speak for them, but I would
Hmm.
what it seems in terms of, obviously the space has been going through, let's call it a bit of a reset period over the last 24 months, especially the last 12 months. And I think a lot of companies in the space are doubling down to really stay focused, and they're putting a lot of attention on price parity. They're putting a lot of attention on quality of the product, and maybe focusing less on other new products or other new innovations.
Hmm.
So even if they did, which I mean, if I was a betting person, probably not. But even if they did, I think that would be great for the category, and I'd welcome it.
Yeah, yeah. Right, we're going to finish off with what's next for you guys, Chris. What's happening for New School Foods next? Is there anything you can reveal that will excite the readers even more than you have already?
I mean, we're trying to stay as laser focused as possible on bringing our product to market, and that starts with getting our pilot production facility up and running. And the reason we have to do that, and we're going more of our own route, is because our production process is novel. It's different. We can't necessarily set that up at a co-manufacturer today. And we're really excited about that, because that in turn is going to give us the freedom and the flexibility to optimize, both in terms of
Mhm.
economics as well as quality of the product. So short answer is we're looking to bring the product to market next year. That's
Mhm.
all we're thinking about.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I can wish you all the luck with the venture. And yeah,
Thank you
let's
so
look
much. I
forward
really
to being
appreciate
on
that.
one of my plates soon.
And thank you for saying that.